In the depths of the unknown, where shadows whisper and fear takes form, welcome to Classic Storytime Hub, the place where classic horror and mystery come alive. Tonight I bring you a reimagined version of The Empty House by Algernon Blackwood, retold with a suspenseful narrative style that grips the soul and breathes new life into this haunting tale. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the shadows.
Some places, like certain people, carry with them an unmistakable taint. You cannot always point to a single feature that betrays it. No twisted smile, no cruel eyes. On the surface they may appear ordinary, even welcoming. Yet a few moments in their presence leaves you with a certainty that something is profoundly wrong, as though corruption seeps from their very being. They radiate a hidden malice, an unseen sickness, and instinctively others recoil. Perhaps houses are no different. The walls may be silent, the windows blind, yet the memory of wicked deeds lingers long after the guilty are gone. The air itself seems to hold the echo of violence, the rage of the offender, the terror of the victim, and anyone who lingers too long feels it. Skin prickles, nerves tighten, and the blood runs cold without any visible cause. Fear arrives uninvited. This particular house gave no outward sign of its reputation. It was not abandoned nor in ruin. Pressed neatly into a corner of the square, it looked identical to its neighbors. The same rows of windows, the same iron railings, the same white steps leading to a heavy black door. Behind it stretched the same narrow garden strip, bordered with tidy hedges, just like every other house in the row. And yet, despite its perfect disguise, this house was different. Terribly, fatally different. No eye could explain why, but those who had crossed its threshold swore that certain rooms were unbearable, filled with a suffocating dread. Tenants came and went in rapid succession, each one driven out by a terror they could not name. The house's reputation became a whispered scandal, for though it looked like every other dwelling in the square, it was nothing of the kind. When Shorthouse arrived for what he thought would be a dull weekend with his Aunt Julia at her small seaside home, he was startled to find her brimming with a strange, restless energy. Her telegram had reached him only that morning, and he had come expecting little more than polite conversation and long silences. Yet the instant he clasped her hand and kissed her time-worn cheek, he felt a spark of something unusual. An undercurrent of excitement that seemed to radiate from her. The feeling only deepened when he discovered there would be no other guests. She had summoned him alone, and for a very particular reason. Something was brewing, and with Aunt Julia, that always meant adventure. She was a woman of iron will and sharp intellect, with an unshakable fascination for the supernatural. Whatever she set her mind to, she pursued with relentless determination. The revelation came after tea, as they strolled together along the dimming seafront. She leaned close, her voice trembling with delight and a hint of awe. "I've got the keys," she whispered, "and they're mine until Monday." "The keys to what? The bathing huts?" he teased, glancing from the waves to the town. He knew well that feigned ignorance was the quickest way to make her reveal her secrets. "Not at all," she said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hush. "The keys to the haunted house in the square, and I intend to go there tonight." A chill ran down Shorthouse's spine. Her tone was too serious for jest. He abandoned his playful manner at once. "You can't possibly go alone," he began. "That's why I sent for you," she cut in firmly. He studied her face in the fading light. The deep lines and sharp features seemed almost transformed, glowing with an enthusiasm that bordered on radiant. Her eyes shone with a fervor that was contagious, and he felt another shiver ripple through him.
"Thank you, Aunt Julia," he said with forced politeness. "That's very kind." "I wouldn't dare to face it by myself," she admitted, her voice rising with excitement. "But with you beside me, I shall enjoy every moment. You're fearless, I know it." "Much obliged," he muttered. "But do you really expect anything to happen?" "A great deal has already happened," she breathed, "though it's been carefully hushed up. 3 tenants have fled in as many months. The house is empty now, and it's said it will never be lived in again." Against his better judgment, Shorthouse felt his curiosity stir. His aunt's conviction was too strong to ignore.
"The house is ancient," Aunt Julia continued, her voice low and deliberate, "and its story, an ugly one, reaches far back into the past. A jealous stableman, consumed with rage over a servant girl he fancied, once hid himself in the cellar. When the household slept, he crept upstairs, cornered her on the landing, and in a frenzy hurled her over the banisters. She fell to her death in the hall below." "And the man?" Shorthouse asked quietly. "They caught him. He was hanged for murder, but that was a century ago, and the details are lost to time." Shorthouse felt his curiosity sharpen, though a flicker of unease stirred when he thought of his aunt. "On one condition," he said at last. "Nothing will stop me, but I'll hear your condition." "That you promise to keep your composure if anything dreadful happens. I mean it, Aunt Julia, no panic." She gave a short, scornful laugh. "Jim, I'm no longer young, and my nerves are not what they once were. But with you beside me, I would fear nothing on earth." That settled it. Shorthouse, ordinary though he was, could not resist the appeal to his pride. He agreed. All evening he steeled himself, quietly locking away his emotions, building a reserve of calm that he could draw upon later. It was a discipline of the inner self, hard to describe, but one that men who have faced great trials know well, and it would serve him before the night was through. At 10:30, they stood together in the hall, bathed in the glow of friendly lamps, still surrounded by the warmth of ordinary life. But when the door closed behind them and the silent street stretched pale under the moonlight, Shorthouse understood the true weight of the ordeal. He would not only have to master his own fear, he would have to shoulder hers as well. He glanced at her face, calm and unreadable in the silver light, and realized that if terror overtook her, it might twist into something far from reassuring. Yet one thought steadied him. He trusted his own will, his own strength, to withstand whatever horror the night might bring. They moved slowly through the deserted streets, the autumn moon spilling silver across the rooftops and carving deep shadows into the ground. The air was utterly still. No wind stirred, no leaf trembled, and the trees along the seafront gardens stood like silent sentinels, watching their progress. Aunt Julia spoke now and then, tossing out trivial remarks, but Shorthouse knew she was only shielding her mind with ordinary chatter, trying to keep darker thoughts at bay. The town itself seemed asleep. Few windows glowed with light, and scarcely a chimney gave off smoke. Shorthouse, already alert, found himself noticing every detail, as though the night demanded his full attention. At a corner they paused, the moonlight revealing the name etched on the wall of a house. Without a word, they turned into the square, slipping into the side cloaked in shadow. "The number is 13, his aunt whispered. Neither of them dared make the obvious remark. Instead, they crossed the broad wash of moonlight and pressed on in silence. Halfway up the square, Shorthouse felt her arm slide into his. It was a small gesture, but it told him everything. The adventure had begun, and she was already leaning on him for strength. Soon they stood before it, the house, tall, Narrow and faintly grotesque, its dingy white facade rose into the night. Bare windows, unshielded by shutters or blinds, stared down like vacant eyes. Cracks ran through the paint, streaks of weather stained the walls, and the balcony sagged unnaturally forward. Yet for all its forlorn appearance, nothing about it should have marked it as cursed. Nothing except its reputation. They glanced behind them, ensuring no one followed, then mounted the steps. The massive black door loomed before them, forbidding and silent. A wave of nervousness swept over them both. Shorthouse fumbled with the key, his aunt's weight heavy on his arm. For a fleeting moment they almost wished the lock would resist, that the door would remain shut, sparing them what lay beyond. But the key grated loudly in the silence, the sound echoing as though the whole world were listening. A stray gust stirred the trees behind them, whispering through the branches, then faded. At last the lock yielded. The heavy door swung inward, and before them yawned a gulf of absolute darkness, waiting. With one last glance at the moonlit square, they slipped inside. The door slammed shut behind them with a thunderous crash, the echoes rolling through the hollow corridors like the roar of some unseen beast. But before the echoes had even died, another sound cut through the silence. A cough. Close, impossibly close, as though a man stood right beside them in the dark. Aunt Julia clutched his arm so suddenly and with such weight that Shorthouse nearly stumbled. His grip tightened on his stick, and he swung it hard toward the sound. The blow met nothing but empty air. His aunt gasped. "There's someone here," she whispered. "Silence," he snapped, forcing steadiness into his voice. "It was only the door." "Light, quickly," she urged. His fingers fumbled with the matchbox, spilling the sticks across the stone floor in a clatter that seemed deafening in the stillness. No footsteps followed, no sound of retreat. At last a flame caught, and he fixed the candle into the hollow of a cigar case. The weak glow spread outward, revealing their surroundings. The sight was bleak. Few things are more desolate than an empty house faintly lit, stripped of life, yet heavy with whispers of violence. They stood in a broad hallway. To the left yawned the dark mouth of a dining room. Ahead stretched a narrowing passage that seemed to sink into deeper shadow, leading toward the kitchen stairs. The staircase rose before them, bare and uncarpeted, its sweep swallowed in gloom. Only halfway up did a shaft of moonlight pierce the darkness, painting a pale patch on the boards. That single beam gave the shadows around it a strange, spectral quality, suggestive, unsettling, as though faces might be forming in the gloom. Shorthouse's eyes lingered on the upper darkness, and for a moment he longed for the safety of the bright drawing room they had left behind, or even the open square bathed in moonlight. But he forced the thought away. Fear was a luxury he could not afford. "Aunt Julia," he said firmly, his voice echoing in the silence, "we must search the house. Every room, every floor, from top to bottom." The echoes of his voice rolled away into the depths of the house, fading slowly until only silence remained. In that silence, Shorthouse turned to his aunt. The candlelight revealed her face, drained of color, lips pressed tight, but she straightened, whispering with effort, "You're right. We must be certain no one is hiding here. That comes first." Her determination impressed him, though her voice trembled. "You're sure of yourself? It isn't too late to turn back?" "I think so," she murmured, her eyes darting nervously toward the shadows. "Only one thing." "What is it?" "You mustn't leave me, not for a single instant." "As long as you understand," he said firmly, "that any sound, any figure, must be faced at once. To hesitate is to give in to fear,
and that would be fatal. She hesitated, then nodded. Agreed. I'll try. Arm in arm they advanced, he with the candle dripping wax onto the floor, the heavy stick in his other hand, she with her cloak drawn tightly about her shoulders. To any onlooker, they might have seemed absurd, but to themselves they were soldiers stepping into enemy territory. They moved on tiptoe, shading the candle so its glow would not betray them through the bare windows. Their first stop was the dining room. It was stripped of life, bare walls, empty grates, mantelpieces that seemed to sneer at them. The silence pressed in, thick and watchful. They felt the room resented their presence, as though unseen eyes glared from every corner. Shadows shifted noiselessly at their backs. Whispers seemed to stir just beyond hearing. It was as if the house itself had paused its secret operations, waiting for them to leave before resuming its dark business. The atmosphere grew heavier with every step, the tension winding tighter around their nerves. From the dining room, they slipped through folding doors into a library, or perhaps a smoking room, where silence, dust, and darkness lay thick as a shroud. From there they returned to the hall near the head of the back stairs. Before them yawned a tunnel of blackness leading down into the lower regions. They paused, unwilling to admit their hesitation, but both felt it. Aunt Julia stumbled at the top step, the candlelight flickering wildly, and Shorthouse himself felt his resolve falter. "Come on," he commanded sharply, forcing strength into his voice. The sound rushed down the stairwell, echoing into the unseen depths. "I'm coming," she whispered, clutching his arm with desperate force.
They descended the stone steps unsteadily, a wave of damp, foul-smelling air rising to meet them. The kitchen stretched out before them at the end of a narrow passage, vast, high-ceilinged, and oppressive. Doors opened into shadowy cupboards where empty jars still lingered like relics, and into narrow back rooms that grew colder and more sinister the deeper they went. Black beetles scattered across the floor, and once, when they brushed against a table in the corner, something heavy leapt down with a rush and skittered into the darkness. The place reeked of abandonment, yet carried the uneasy impression that it had only just been vacated. From the kitchen they moved toward the scullery. The door stood ajar. As they pushed it wide, Aunt Julia gave a sudden, piercing scream, instantly muffled by her own hand. Shorthouse froze, his breath caught, his spine filled with a chill so sharp it felt like ice pouring through him. There, framed between the doorposts, stood a woman. Her hair hung in wild tangles, her eyes bulged with terror, and her face was as pale as death itself. She did not move. For one dreadful second she simply stared. Then the candle guttered, the flame wavered, and she was gone. The doorway yawned empty, filled with nothing but darkness. "Only the cursed candlelight," Shorthouse muttered, though his voice sounded strange, not his own. "Come on, Aunt. There's nothing there." He pulled her forward. Their feet clattered loudly, their movements exaggerated with false bravado, but beneath his skin he felt the crawling sensation of 1,000 ants. The weight on his arm told him plainly he was carrying them both. The scullery was barren and cold, more like a prison cell than a room of service. They circled it, testing the door to the yard and the windows, all locked tight. Aunt Julia moved beside him like one in a trance, her eyes shut, her steps guided only by his arm. Her strange composure astonished him, though he noticed a subtle change in her face, something undefinable, unsettling, beyond his ability to name. "There's nothing here, Aunt," he said quickly, forcing cheer into his tone.
Let's go upstairs. We'll search the rest of the house and then choose a room to keep watching."
She clung close to his side as they locked the kitchen door behind them. The climb back into the hall felt like a reprieve. The air lighter, the moon now spilling further down the staircase, casting pale light across the boards. Step by cautious step, they ascended into the dark vault of the upper house, the wood groaning beneath their weight. On the first floor, they searched the vast double drawing rooms. Dust, neglect, and shadows were all that greeted them. No furniture, no trace of recent life, only silence. They pushed open the folding doors between the front and back rooms, found nothing, and returned to the landing to continue upward. But scarcely a dozen steps higher, they froze. Both had heard it. Their eyes met across the trembling candle flame, wide with the same realization. From the very room they had just left came the unmistakable sound of doors closing. Heavy doors, their booming thud followed by the sharp click of a latch. "We must go back," whispered Shorthouse, his voice low and steady. Aunt Julia stumbled after him, her dress drained of color, her dress catching at her feet. When they re-entered the front drawing room, the truth was plain. The folding doors stood shut. They had been open moments before. Without hesitation, Shorthouse flung them wide. He half expected a figure waiting in the darkness beyond, but only cold air and emptiness greeted them. They searched both rooms. The doors would not move without force. There was no draft, not even enough to stir the candle flame. The silence was absolute, the emptiness undeniable. "It's begun," came a whisper at his side, his aunt's voice, though it sounded strange, almost unrecognizable. He gave a grim nod, pulling out his watch. 15 minutes to midnight. Carefully, he set the candle against the wall, its flame quivering, and noted the event in his book. The act of writing steadied him, though the silence pressed in heavier than ever. Aunt Julia would later insist that, at that precise moment, she had turned her head toward the inner room, convinced she'd heard something stir in the shadows. But both of them agreed on one fact: the sudden pounding of feet, swift, heavy, rushing straight toward them, and then, in an instant, the candle went out. For Shorthouse, however, there was more. Rising from his crouch after steadying the candle, he found himself face to face with a vision so close he could have brushed it with his lips. A man's face, thick features twisted with rage, eyes blazing with savage fury. It was the face of a coarse, ordinary man, yet alive with such venomous passion that it became monstrous, a mask of pure malice. There was no draught, no stirring of the air, only the muffled thunder of unseen feet, the sudden thrust of that hideous face, and the smothering of the candle's flame. A cry escaped Shorthouse before he could stop it. He staggered as Aunt Julia clung to him with desperate force, her terror silent but absolute. She had seen nothing, only heard the rushing steps, and her composure returned with surprising swiftness. Shorthouse struck a match, and the shadows fled before the flare. Together they found the candle, its flame not blown out, but crushed. The wick was pressed flat into the wax, as though by some heavy, deliberate hand. How his aunt mastered her fear so quickly, Shorthouse never understood. His admiration for her grew, even as his own courage faltered. Yet the evidence of brute force chilled him more than any phantom. He forced from his mind the tales of physical mediums and their dangerous powers, for if such stories were true, then he and his aunt were nothing more than conduits, feeding the energies of a house already brimming with menace. It was like walking with naked flames through a cellar filled with gunpowder. With little hesitation, He struck another match, relit the candle, and pressed onward. His aunt's arm trembled against his, and his own steps faltered more than once. Yet together they climbed steadily, searching each floor with grim determination. Finding nothing, they mounted the final staircase to the top of the house. Here they discovered a warren of servants' rooms, low, sloping ceilings draped in cobwebs, broken chairs with cane seats torn through, cracked mirrors leaning drunkenly against the walls, and bedsteads collapsing with age. The plaster was crumbling, the windows small and mean. It was a place of decay and misery, and they were glad to leave it behind. At the stroke of midnight, they entered a small chamber on the 3rd floor, just beside the stairwell, and resolved to make it their post for the remainder of the night. The room was bare, stripped of everything but its reputation. It was here, so the story went, that the furious groom had cornered his victim at last. The air was bitterly cold, yet it carried something more than chill. Shorthouse felt it at once, a subtle force that gnawed at his will, draining his strength, sapping his resolve. Within minutes he was aware of a strange depletion, as though the very atmosphere conspired to weaken him. Of all the horrors that night, this invisible assault upon his spirit would remain the most dreadful. They placed the candle inside the cupboard, leaving the door slightly ajar so its glow would not cast shifting shadows. The cloak was spread across the floor, and they sat with their backs to the wall, waiting. Shorthouse positioned himself within arm's reach of the landing door. From there he could watch both the main staircase plunging into darkness below, and the narrow servant stairs climbing into the gloom above. His heavy stick lay ready at his side. Through the open window, the moon rode high, and the stars looked down like watchful eyes. One by one the town clocks tolled midnight. When the last chime faded, silence reclaimed the night. Vast, oppressive, unbroken, save for the distant, hollow boom of the sea.
The silence inside the house grew unbearable. Awful, Shorthouse thought, because at any instant it might shatter with some sound of terror. The waiting gnawed at their nerves. When they spoke at all, it was in whispers, for their voices, raised above a murmur, sounded strange and hollow, as though the house itself mocked them. A chill crept into the room, not entirely from the night air, but from something unseen, something that drained their confidence and dulled their will. Real fear was no longer a possibility, it was becoming a presence. Shorthouse felt his blood pounding in his ears, so loud it seemed to drown out other faint noises that teased the edge of hearing. Whenever he strained to listen, the sounds vanished. Yet the impression of movement persisted, shifting, restless, somewhere deep within the house. Not the drawing-room floor where the doors had closed of their own accord, not the kitchen, nor the scullery. No, the sounds were further away, and yet horribly near. Then the truth struck him like ice in his veins. The noises were not below, they were above, upstairs, in those cramped, shadow-choked servants' rooms with their broken furniture and cobwebbed ceilings, the very place where the doomed girl had first been hunted. And once he realized it, he heard them plainly. Footsteps, slow, stealthy, padding across the passage overhead, weaving in and out of the rooms, brushing past the abandoned furniture. He turned sharply to his aunt to see if she too had heard. The candlelight leaking through the cupboard door lit her face starkly against the wall. But what made him gasp was not her pallor, it was the transformation spreading across her features. The deep lines smoothed, the skin tightened, the wrinkles vanished.
Her face, save for the eyes, seemed to shed its years, taking on the eerie semblance of youth, almost of childhood.
He stared in stunned silence, astonishment so sharp it bordered on horror. It was his aunt's face, yes, but not the face he knew. It was the face of a girl, 40 years younger, vacant, innocent, emptied of every trace of character. He had heard tales of terror so absolute it could strip a human face bare, erasing all expression, but never had he believed it could be so literal or so ghastly. For what he saw was not youth, but the dreadful mask of fear itself, etched into her features with merciless clarity. When she turned under the weight of his gaze, he shut his eyes instinctively, unable to endure the sight. A moment later, when he dared to look again, relief washed over him. The mask had lifted. She was smiling faintly now, though her skin was chalk white, and the normal lines of her face had returned. "Anything wrong?" he managed to ask, his voice hollow. "I feel cold and a little frightened," she whispered. He offered to close the window, but she clutched his arm with sudden desperation. "Don't leave me, not for a second." "It's upstairs," she added, half laughing, half trembling. "I know it's upstairs, but I can't go up there." Shorthouse thought differently. He knew that only action could keep them from collapse. To sit and wait was to surrender. He pulled out the brandy flask, poured a glass of raw spirit, and pressed it into her hand. She drank, shivering as it burned its way down. His mind was clear. They could not flee. To run would be to admit defeat, and defeat meant terror would consume them both. The only way forward was toward the source of the disturbance. If there was to be a climax, it must be faced head-on. He could do it now, perhaps only now. In 10 minutes, his strength might be gone. Above them, the noises grew louder. Boards creaked. Something moved stealthily from room to room, bumping clumsily against the furniture. He waited just long enough for the brandy to take hold, then rose to his feet. His voice, when it came, was steady, resolute. "Now, Aunt Julia, we're going upstairs. We'll find out what's making that noise. You must come too. That was our agreement."
He lifted his stick and reached for the candle. At his side, a frail figure stirred, Aunt Julia, pale and trembling, whispering faintly that she was ready to come. Her courage astonished him. Greater than his own, it radiated a strange, quiet strength that shamed him even as it steadied his resolve. Together, they crossed the landing, careful not to glance into the black gulf over the banisters. Then they began the climb, step by step, toward the sounds that grew louder with every heartbeat. Halfway up, Aunt Julia stumbled, and as Shorthouse taut her arm, a violent crash erupted overhead in the servants' corridor. It was followed instantly by a scream, high, piercing, a cry of terror and desperate appeal fused into one. Before they could retreat, the passage above exploded with movement. Someone came hurtling down the stairs towards them, stumbling, racing wildly 3 steps at a time. The footsteps were light, frantic, but close behind thundered a heavier tread, shaking the staircase beneath their feet. Shorthouse and his aunt pressed themselves flat against the wall as the chaos descended. A whirlwind of sound engulfed them. 2 figures, pursuer and pursued, tearing past at breakneck speed. They felt the rush of movement, heard the pounding of feet, yet saw nothing. No face, no hand, no shred of clothing, only the deafening storm of invisible flight. The boards below groaned under the impact, first one body, then another. A pause followed, thick and dreadful. Then came the lighter steps again, faltering, uncertain, retreating into the very room they had just left. The heavier tread followed close behind. From within came the muffled sounds of struggle, Scuffling, gasping, a smothered cry. Then silence. A single set of footsteps emerged onto the landing, slow and deliberate, each tread heavy with finality. For half a minute, the house held its breath. Then came a rushing through the air, followed by a sickening crash far below, echoing up from the stone floor of the hall.
A silence deeper than death settled over the house. Nothing stirred. The candle flame burned steady, untouched, as though mocking the terror that had just swept through them. The air was still, undisturbed. Yet Aunt Julia, stricken with fear, began groping her way toward the stairs. Soft sobs escaped her, and when Shorthouse slipped his arm around her, he felt her trembling violently, fragile as a leaf in a storm. He paused only long enough to retrieve the cloak from the little room. Then together they began the long descent. Step by step, arm in arm, they moved in silence, never daring to glance behind. The hall below lay empty, yet all the way down they felt it, that dreadful presence pacing them. When they quickened their steps, it lagged. When they slowed, it closed in. Always there, always following. At each turn of the staircase, they kept their eyes lowered, terrified of what horror might be waiting just above. At last, with shaking hands, Shorthouse forced the front door open. The night air rushed in, cool and salt from the sea. They stepped out into the moonlight, breathing deeply, as though surfacing from drowning. Behind them, the house loomed silent and watchful, its secrets sealed once more. And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.